Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call the August 19th, 2021 special meeting of the Minnetonka School Board to order. Can we all rise and please say the pledge to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, everybody. We're running a little late, but we will get going. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Katie, Lisa. Comments or additions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have an agenda. Our first agenda item is decision on opening of school plan. Dr. Peterson.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, it's a challenging situation to present this, and because I know that there's a lot of controversy about lots of things in what we're doing in the schools, and we've heard some input from citizens who liked what we did last year and some who felt that it was not in the best interest of their children. Some have pulled their children for the coming year. That's doesn't make me happy to lose families from our district who would love to be here. So with the board's permission, I want to go through the plan, and I think probably it'd be best to go through the whole thing and then come back to questions. Is that okay?
I think that works.
Okay.
Dr. Pearson.
So let me start out by with some general comments. First of all, the district takes the dangers of COVID infection and its students and staff seriously. We all worry about our loved ones, but we also worry a lot about the students under our care, the staff who work with us. And we're also very troubled by the different attitudes and feelings and often polarization in our community around even the science of the virus. I wish we could all work together to a common end, and while I think we have a common goal of what's best for our kids, we're coming at it from polar opposite directions many times. We also see changing numbers related to COVID, whether it's the vaccine, whether it's the level of protection you get from masks, whether it's the effectiveness of different measures that we take. It's concerning that we often get a sense that we're not getting there yet, and that maybe we're treading water at best. I think there's a lot of changing of the science as new research reveals new information that the public has to digest. Sometimes that is concerning because it seemed like yesterday here was the science, and today here's the science on another level. Just as an aside, it's troubling to me for people to believe that science seems to be established and the science is the science. Well, that's not how science works. Science is always evolving, and by curious people who reach new horizons. There's a lot of different recommendations from our community and from people who know a lot about the virus, often polar opposites and where they want to go. And of course, then there are political considerations often mixed in to different parts of the plans and the distribution of resources and information. So just a general concern that as people trying to find a solution that will work for everybody, it's going to be very difficult to do that because people are in such different places looking at the same thing. And I swear sometimes if we said people who have this position go on that end of the room and those who have another position over here and those who aren't sure in the middle would be empty because everybody has a position on these things, and they're often at different ends of the room. So, I have the utmost respect for what the board has to do, making the decisions, and so I take my input to you seriously. My only goal is to keep our students safe and be sure they are well educated. And I think that's really ultimately what most people's goal is. I would point out that many countries around the world and many states in America have tried different strategies for dealing with COVID, and there's really no consensus at this point on what works best on a larger scale. So we haven't found the key with all the efforts we've made. And I say, obviously, staying away from all people would provide the cleanest solution, but human beings don't work that way. They have to be social, and they have to interact with each other, and somehow we have to facilitate that. Some who favor masking everyone cannot fathom why anyone would have a legitimate issue with that. And also, I'm troubled by the fact that we have some people who want others to go along with their idea, and that they have to be forced to do so because they think they're in the right position. As I said, the virus is an evolving science, and it has a mind of its own. One of the speakers we've heard talked about the different variants that are out there, and they will keep coming at us, and they'll have different impacts. What's been unleashed on the world's population is horrible, and it's going to be a long battle, I'm afraid. Arguing that there's settled science on most COVID issues is not understanding how science really evolves. Science is built on skepticism and trying to find new answers. So, people who just buy into one place where science is at a time, will find that they often get left behind in the new insights that are going to be produced. And of course, many highly educated and intelligent people are looking at the science and reaching different conclusions. Members of this board probably look at the same information and come to different conclusions. So, that's just part of how we function anymore. And that there's nothing bad or wrong with any of the people making those different conclusions. It's in our DNA to be skeptical, and we have to listen to people with a certain amount of skepticism. Barely half of the U.S. population now trusts the CDC, and the CDC has done some wonderful things for us as a society over the years, and most of us have always taken their recommendations confidently, but people are becoming more and more uncertain about what they're getting from the CDC. So I'd like to go through the need for a plan and why we are talking about this item tonight. We thought in many ways that this year would be pretty much back to what 1920 was starting out to be, because it seemed like COVID was on the run. And, I, like many people, got confident that we were going to be in a great place. We talked about the incidence of COVID from the county reports dropping to zero. It never quite got there, and now it's rebounding. And I keep you apprised of all that. So we're following many of the elements of the 2021 plan, where we put in almost all last summer, putting that plan together. And of course, it was much more focused on changing strategies for the learners in our schools than on all of the other things that we're now encountering. Actually, there were only a very small handful of COVID cases transmitted at school last year. So we did keep it from going from one student to another, or one student to a staff member, or vice versa. And so, our strategies altogether worked, and we didn't even have the benefit during much of the year of having people vaccinated. So, the strategies we used were effective, and I give a lot of credit to our parents who kept kids out of school when they were not feeling well and maybe had COVID, same as staff. The point about cases from our student population is that almost all those cases are coming when they're outside of school. I think that's an important point to keep in mind. And I don't, as they say, the past does not predict the future. We're in a different situation now for many reasons, but we would still expect that most of the cases that happen will be from outside the school. Children getting it from mom or dad, children getting it from a family event, or staff getting it from being at a different event. So the points we'd make to parents is don't send infected students to school and don't have infected staff report to work, period. Too often I hear adults who have had COVID say, well, at first I just had the sniffles and I thought it probably just my sinuses or maybe a cold. People need to think COVID first, in my opinion, that find out if it's COVID before you start diagnosing yourself with other things, because it's too much a risk to do otherwise. As I've mentioned, parents are very helpful in keeping kids out of school. But the one unnerving concern I had from last year is that we started to hear that some athletes refused to get tested when they had COVID symptoms because they didn't want to miss their sports due to quarantine. So we can't have that kind of rogue behavior. I know you've all read every email that's come to you, every word of it, as I have, and I'm deeply appreciative, and I know all of you are, of those messages and the analysis of the situation. Everyone has a unique point of view on it, and so, we get the benefit of a lot of different thinking. People present great insights and are making informed recommendations. We are blessed by people in this community who know what they're talking about, and even if they have totally different points of view on things, they're well-reasoned and informed. So I think we've benefited from all of that, even though it's confusing to hear all of that because, you got to choose among some of those choices. Again, I think people are looking at different science-based research and recommendations. Our society is built on lots of different opinions, lots of different people can do research. It's not all done by the CDC. And so a lot of scientists have different conclusions. And of course, we have the benefit of a lot of medical professionals with experience and insight who have been through treating COVID patients or treating children who have COVID even. As you well know, you can't watch TV for more than 15 minutes and not realize there's a national debate over almost everything we have in this plan. It's a controversial issue across the nation. I'm sure there were thousands of school boards meeting tonight and hearing much of the same conversations that people have different opinions on it. So now, without the governor calling all of the requirements out, each district has the ability to determine their own plan. So they will be different. We're not all going to look the same like we did last year. And we've accessed make the point to everyone that we've accessed the recommendations from government health organizations and professional organizations, the CDC, Minnesota Department of Health, Minnesota Department of Education, OSHA, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. So the board has the full benefit of looking at their recommendations. And we don't need to be medical experts to be able to read and digest the data, and that's the beauty of our society. We have highly educated people who don't have to be specialized in an area to be able to understand what the information is. And so we don't always rely upon people telling us how we ought to think. So our plan for this year is to provide in-person learning. I think you've heard from many parents that that's what they want. They want a way for kids to be in person, and yet we'll have a virtual option at all grades. And we've been plugging in enrollees in that for the last several days. So we're getting interest from all over the metro and really all over the state. I don't want to start naming districts because I don't think it's fair to them to describe them, but there's a lot of interest, whether it's from their district or they themselves realize here's an opportunity to get in a Minnetonka classroom virtually. And I think we also, as much as I hate to say this, have to be prepared to change course if things get ugly. Nobody yet has thought about putting everybody on virtual, but we've got to be ready to shift in that direction if things get really bad. So, and it's possible the governor could issue another order. So, we have to be prepared for being nimble this year. We have different conditions than we had last year at this time, and even in January before we started to get vaccinations. So then we started getting people vaccinated. So a lot of our staff, if not most of them, are vaccinated. We found out today that 71% of our high school students are vaccinated. So that's a plus. A little bit smaller numbers of younger students, but certainly many middle school students are vaccinated. And then, of course, as I said a moment ago, we saw numbers drop to almost nothing in May and early June. And then along came Delta. And so numbers have reversed. We've seen numbers of cases increase dramatically each week, at least dramatically over where they were the previous week. We're still a long ways from the peaks we were in much of last year. So walking through the plan, first of all, there's a universal requirement for masking on buses. So all students who are on buses have to be masked. The details on buses will be provided to parents and students, but they, for example, encourage siblings to sit together, and that students have to ride the bus to school that they're assigned to and home from school that they're assigned to. They can't go with a friend on their bus like we've often been able to let them do in the past. And we're anticipating that more parents will probably be driving their kids to school again. It's just the nature of it. So with the parking lot pretty much full at the high school, it's going to be more challenging to weave traffic into that building from parents. So we'll probably see a lot more backup on Highway 7 both directions. We're also going to have many of the measures to keep students safe at school that we had before. We had a major emphasis last year, and we have it again this year. I think it's our ace in the hole, and that's the ventilation systems, which the board has put in over the last 18 years or so, are powerful and effective. We've had them certified by engineers, and we've also put in purification systems in every classroom and office. So we were the first district in Minnesota to do that, one of the first nationally. And so we've always paid attention to the quality of air our students have. And so we're now, the purification systems draw the air down from the mouth and nose of people in the room to the machine that purifies the air. And so we're getting a lot of turnover of air in those classrooms and bringing in fresh air as well as purifying the air we have. So that is our greatest assurance, frankly. And we'll have people try to poke holes in that, but that's the reality. That's our most powerful tool. We're also going to have extensive cleaning again. We're going to have shields available so teachers can divide students in their classrooms if they choose to. And I'll talk more later about the distancing expectations. So we expect parents to check their students before they leave for school. Check their temperature, check their symptoms if they have any, because our best tool for preventing the spread of the virus at school is to not let anybody come to school or get on a bus who has been infected. So we're going to continue to ask parents to be diligent about that and to make sure that we don't have students coming that way. We know that the Delta variant has a shorter incubation period, so families should be more watchful in the event that a family member has symptoms. So mom and dad might have symptoms one day and the child could come down the next or a couple days later. So they need to watch that closely so they don't wait 3 days to finally go in and check themselves or whatever. And we'll also continue to watch case numbers in the schools and the rates in the communities. So, and I'll keep you apprised as a board about all those. We know that younger children still have much lower rates of serious illness than older people. However, they do get the Delta more easily than the initial strain. And we don't know the characteristics of some of the other variants that will be coming at us. So we get general advice from the CDC in Atlanta, but they're giving advice to the nation, and they don't know what Minnetonka, Minnesota is like. So it's important that we evaluate their advice along with other information that we can digest as intelligent people. We're still emphasizing layering so that we have a lot of ways to keep COVID out. Many of them by themselves could work, but we just keep piling on opportunities to prevent COVID from infecting anybody at school, and that's why we were successful last year. That's partly why we were successful. I, again, give credit to parents for keeping kids home. So we informed families early in the summer when COVID was headed for zero that we did not intend to require masks so that we could start to find out from families what they would plan to do with in-school or virtual. Then as the Delta variant started to increase, of course, we got more questions about what direction we're going. But it was not wise, in my view, for us to change where we're going, but to leave that up to the board when you're ready to take up that decision. And so we are getting a lot of people who are choosing e-learning. I think that once you make a decision to either have masks required or not have masks required, you're going to get different people choosing e-learning in greater numbers. So we have, we have a chance for that to explode overnight, and people are, going to wait to the last minute because that's how people are. So we've urged them to sign up. As I said, we have well over 100 already, that have signed up and are going to fill up our classrooms. So we may very well have more than one section of every grade once this shakes out. We're promoting 3-foot distancing, but we also realize that with the full class now, that's a little bit harder to achieve at all times. So we want students to be 3 foot apart if possible. We want teachers to try to stay 6 foot away from teachers if possible. But again, teachers have to go work with individual students. We want to assure a good flow and distancing in the hallways, in the cafeteria, and the classrooms. So we'll be emphasizing, kids going in line and going different directions. We spend a lot of time teaching elementary kids all of that, and when they're there in elementary, then high schoolers don't do it. It's kind of like in the winter when the snow has covered parking lots. Nobody knows how to park any longer because there aren't any lines there. So, we need to work with all of our kids to make sure they don't stop in the hallway and cluster and talk to a friend and tie up traffic. So a little bit about lunchrooms and how we're going to do food serving. And these have been really worked out with each, the principals at each level. So the high school needs 5 different lunches. And we're going to be able to have some students eat in the south end of the commons, if you can kind of visualize that, or give that access to them. And then we're going to use the back gym. Some of you may have never been to the back gym, but the back gym is kind of behind all the other gyms. And we envision making that more of a reservation area where students who particularly want to get distance and feel the need to do that can have a reservation to go to that back gym and eat. So that gets us down to a comfortable number so we can have close to the 3-foot distancing in the high school cafeteria. At the middle schools, all students are going to be able to select into a cohort for lunch, and that will change periodically throughout the year, where if they would like to be in a different group, next 9 weeks, they can opt into that. But no matter where they are in the building, before they get to lunch, they will go to that cohort at the lunch table. So that's the plan at the middle school, and that'll also be in the cafeteria then, and we'll be able to achieve mostly 3-foot distancing. The elementary is a little more tricky, and some of the schools will want to have children eating in the classrooms, again, like we did last year. I remember a few years ago when I suggested that we could use classrooms for cafeterias, I almost got run out of town. But now people are realizing that classrooms can be used that way and provide that cohort without going out into the school as much. So each school will decide how many kids they want to have in the lunchroom and how many need to be in their classrooms, and kind of moderate that number in the lunchroom. So that's a general plan with all of the eating areas. We will continue to have temperature taking. We didn't get many high temperatures at all last year. Not many at all. And hopefully that's because parents were keeping those kids home before we ever got to see them. We're also, again, promoting good hygiene and health behaviors. We'll have regular washing of hands. We'll have sanitizing for hands. We'll have sanitizing for desktops and all of that. And then, of course, we'll have regular cleaning of surfaces with disinfectants throughout the day. I think it's important that parents work with their children on hand washing practices. That's something we maybe do when they're little, and then we kind of let that go and we think they've got it down. But there are some best practices for good hand washing, and I hate to even describe this to parents, but we need to have help with that one. We also want people who are ill to stay home, as I said a minute ago, and any unusual health symptoms should be viewed as possibly being COVID. So if they would do that, that'll be helpful to us. And if anyone has symptoms that they know are truly symptoms of COVID, and they're waiting for test results, they should stay home until the results are known. We've heard of people who kind of got tired of waiting and came back a day early, and then they got a positive test result. Then we, of course, get into the whole face covering controversy, and that's raging throughout the country. Again, you can't turn on TV without hearing, at least news shows, without hearing the controversy raging about whether we should have universal masking or not. The recommendation I want you to start with is that all students should be recommended to wear masks, and staff should be recommended to wear masks. That's what CDC and Minnesota Department of Health have recommended, that we recommend to everybody that they should be wearing masks. So beyond that, I'd like to work through that whole issue with the board tonight as we can and reach some conclusions. Three other options that I see to doing what I just said. One would be a strict requirement to have all students and staff wear masks at school. Second would be to require masks for only students and staff who have not been vaccinated. You see some of the problems with that one. And the third one would be to require all students in grades K through 7, basically under 12, to wear masks at all times and have a strong recommendation for students in grades 8 through 12 to wear masks and for all staff to wear masks. So those are the options that I've looked at. You may have more that you can come up with and go to it. Again, as I have throughout the last year, I want to emphasize the power of the N95 and the KN95. Now, they're not perfect, but they are universally determined to be the most effective masks that are out there. And it's amazing to me the number of even medical people I've talked to about differences in masks, and it's like, no, mask is a mask. Well, they aren't. A mask is a mask. First of all, the N95 and the KN95 protect the wearer from other people, and it also protects them, other people from them. Almost no other mask is it asserted that they protect the wearer from other sources of COVID. So just to give you a flavor of that, we have a number of KN95 masks that we still had from last year. We now have another 100,000 N95s. We have another 50,000 small size N95s. And we have 100,000 petite size for very small children KN95s, and another 80,000 adult KN95s. So we are well supplied to back up our offer to parents and staff to have N95 and KN95 masks available. That's all I've ever worn. I don't know if you have worn those or not, but they are heavier, so people, have a little more trouble breathing through them. But that's the purpose. And so I really want to emphasize that to our staff and parents that we're ready to meet that need. And I know that some of the experts out there, including like Dr. Michael Osterholm, has really started to focus on there is a difference in masks, and even the surgical masks are not nearly as effective as the N95 or KN95 masks for protecting people themselves and others. The reality is that almost none of these masks, including the N95 and the KN95, were invented to stop the COVID virus. I don't know why there isn't a greater push on the ingenuity and the creativity of American manufacturers to come up with some masks that really stop all this. But, we just are too happy with the washcloth that somebody sewed together or the sloppy mask that we have and take it as a mask. So I don't mean to get preachy, but it's really, I think we can, it's a way to really have true compromise here if people would pay attention to it, because we could have unmasked and masked people together, and the masked people could be protecting themselves through wearing an N95 for the most part. Not that they don't have some flaws. So we've looked at a lot of research studies. You probably are tired of looking at all the research that I've been forwarding you on both the pro and the con of mask effectiveness. The thing is that you can have the same data and people come to different conclusions about what the data show. One of the studies that I sent to you is the EPA study on the effectiveness of different masks, and that's in your packet showing what they've found out, and that's from the EPA, United States EPA. The other point I guess I want to make on masks before I leave that and finish up here is that in addition to the effectiveness of the mask as itself, is that often wearing a mask can affect individuals differently. Health issues can be caused by wearing masks. Emotional issues can be created by wearing masks. Social issues are created by wearing masks. Behavioral issues are created. And it also creates a barrier between the teacher and the student in, facial expressions and encouragement and all of that goes into educating a child. So there are other issues that need to be considered in addition to just the pure science of does the mask work or not. So that's all I have on mask part. We will have social distancing expectations. We will continue to encourage vaccinations. I know there are people who are not happy that we encourage vaccination, but I think it is part of our obligation to have parents at least evaluate vaccinations for their students and consider it. And as I noted a moment ago, 71% of our students have been vaccinated at the high school, and all of those had parent permission as far as I know. We certainly never forced anyone to take a vaccination. So if someone's aware of that, I want to know about it. The district only accepts laboratory confirmed test results, so there's a lot of people out there who want to get their own test results, give them to us. They have to be from a certified laboratory. There are test kits that can be used at home, but they have to order those from the district and have us involved in getting the results. We're going to use the MDH decision tree for making decisions about who needs to be quarantined and so forth this year. And the nurse in each school is the point of contact at the school level. Coaches and supervisors are the points of contact for people in their activity. So on contact tracing and quarantining, there are changes. I know we've had people ask about that. And now students or staff with COVID will be quarantined for 10 days, not the 14 days that was used before. So those are people with COVID. Close contacts who have been vaccinated or had COVID itself will not be quarantined. And we could have a requirement for immediate testing of those people if we question how much at risk they are of getting COVID. We will use the 5-day quarantining for close contacts at school. So if there's as I said earlier, the Delta virus moves much more quickly than the original strain of the virus. So we want to move more quickly, and we'll move those close contacts out and finish that quarantining quickly, get them back to school, because our goal is to get kids in school and keep kids in school. And then there will be some testing to get them back. And then if there's a close contact at home, we're going to have a 10-day quarantine for that, and that's per the MDH expectation that we do that, or that families do that. Then there are some exemptions on quarantining. I've touched on a little bit of that, where there are certain circumstances where students and staff are simply exempt from quarantine. So if someone has completed a COVID vaccination, 2 doses in a 2-dose series, or 1 dose in a 1-dose series, and is exposed, they do not need to quarantine if all of the following are true. Or 3 points. The COVID-19 exposure was at least 14 days after their vaccination series was fully completed. They do not currently have any symptoms of COVID-19, and they have provided documentation of their vaccination series to the school health office and or director of health services that clearly indicates their name, date of vaccination, and vaccine brand. So those are the 3 criteria that need to be met to not have to go into quarantine. And then, if a student or staff member does not want to provide their vaccine information and/or testing results, then they would be subject to the quarantine. If someone has previously been infected with COVID-19 and is subsequently identified as a close contact, they do not need to quarantine if all of the following apply. These are 3 points. Their COVID illness was laboratory confirmed and exposure was within 90 days of their positive test. They do not currently have any symptoms of COVID-19, and they have provided documentation of their COVID positive results to the school health office and/or director of health services that clearly indicates their name, source of testing, date of testing, and positive test results. So there are new quarantining that I think will be helpful to families. And finally, if a student or staff member does not want to provide documentation around their positive test results, then they would simply be subject to a quarantine. We're not going to let them just beg off on it because they don't want to cooperate with those procedures. So just to close quickly on the plan, we are going to maintain a safe learning environment for everybody. No matter what you decide tonight on all the aspects of it, it will be a safe environment for everyone. We will have regular cleaning of surfaces. The athletic and other activities will be controlled by the school, but also by the high school league in the case of athletics and some other non-athletic events. We will have mental health support available for students, and we'll regularly check on students to be sure that we're finding out how much support they need. And we will also have academic support for all students, as we did last year, and help students finish as successfully as possible. So that's a quick review of the plan, and our intention is to take your decision tonight, if you make a decision tonight, and publicize that to our families as quickly as possible. So I'm open to questions or comments.
I think we start with questions and comments from the board. We can see where we're at. Anybody want to go?
I just had one potential, a fourth alternative for us to consider with the likelihood of the K through 7th graders being able to be vaccinated in November, December. If it could be, they would have to wear masks until that time, and then just like the high schoolers, if they've been vaccinated, they don't have to wear masks. If they haven't been vaccinated, they would. So
I would suggest that come back to you for a decision, if that's how you want to do it at that point. Or if you want to make that part of your decision whenever you make it, so that it's clear how that would work.
Because that's one thing I wanted to understand, what the logistics would look like.
Yeah.
Of, if a student was vaccinated, not wearing a mask, and the ones that are, how would we handle, ensuring that they're wearing masks in school?
Yeah.
So I didn't.
Yeah,
So again,
whatever you decide about secondary tonight, or whenever you decide, I think you're really saying you want elementary probably to mirror that whenever they have the chance to be vaccinated.
Yeah.
The thing is, we don't know what rate they'll be vaccinated at if it's younger children. That could be quite a bit lower. Judging from.
Just as an alternative, because, to me, that is the greatest layer of protection is vaccination, right? So to the extent that people are vaccinated, that's the best step forward for protection. So
Right.
just another incentive, right, for
Right.
people
Yeah,
to take that
absolutely.
step. But
Yeah.
So Mike, are you suggesting, if we're looking at alternative 3, just right to clarification, you're looking at alternative 3, but having it sunset at some point for that K through 7?
yeah, so then it would sunset in K through 7 would follow similar as, the high schoolers,
Yep.
right?
At some point, some predetermined point, whether it's
Secondary.
vaccination or a certain vaccination rate or a certain date.
Yeah,
Yeah.
talking through alternatives,
Yeah.
I think that would be one that, again, speaks to how, as things evolve, we would look to evolve. And it's something certainly we could make that decision later in the school year, but I think it's important that if that was a path that we were, we'd communicate that because it's looking like it will change fairly soon, that younger kids will be able to be vaccinated.
Yeah. I would also make the point that some of the scientists are saying that there's a wave to this, and that some of the states that have had heavier cases of the Delta variant already are seeing it drop off. And so they see some peak and then going down after that. So there'll be some help from COVID itself.
Great, thank you, Mike.
Yeah,
John?
just a question about the policy, and I have broader comments about the whole thing, but as I compare the MDH to the one we have, the MDH says if both students were wearing a correctly fitted mask, they get an exemption from quarantining. But we're saying if you've had a contact with somebody, because you're saying masks are strongly encouraged but not required, that they're still gonna go to a 5-day quarantine. And so when I think about our schools being full, and when you think about the middle school, I just use the middle school as an example, where you have 7 periods in the day and kids are weaving throughout. And if a kid sits next to 4 kids, each one of his 7 classes, he has the ability to send 28 kids to quarantine, or she.
Yeah, and that was certainly an issue, last year, if they had moved around that much. And of course, we had some cohort groups for a while that
Right.
helped us there.
But the way the MDH and others say, if both students are wearing a correctly fitted mask, then
Right.
they're exempt from quarantine.
Right.
Okay, I just want to make sure I had
Yeah, no,
that,
that's correct.
that aspect correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's, in the case of everybody being masked.
Right, well, but they say both students, right, correctly
Yeah.
wearing well-fitted masks is actually the language.
And I think that well-fitted is something we need to really work harder on this year
Yeah.
too.
Right, agreed.
We don't want to nag kids about it, but on the other hand, it is important to be, keep it where it needs to be, yeah.
So John, so is there a reason why that exclusion was not included?
Well, I think it's because of the recommendation that we just recommend that everybody wear a mask. So I think what John's, and Annie, are you here? I think the point John's making is in the case where a masking is required, then that is true.
Right.
So if you went to that policy, that's how it would work. Is Annie here or not?
Right, so if you required masks, then you wouldn't need a quarantine policy
Right, right.
per the way it works.
So that's why I didn't put that in,
Right,
because it can be put in when you make your decision if you go to all masking.
right.
So you have to have both. You have to have everybody in mass. It couldn't be.
Right, pick your own, yep.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
No, good point. Same question, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Mhm.
And then, do you want to make your,
Can I clarify that?
Yeah.
Is it a mandate with the 2 masks, or is it, or I don't like the word mandate really, but is it where everybody's required, or is it if it's recommended and 2 kids are wearing a mask, that exemption would still apply?
So the Minnesota Department of Health allows that. It doesn't get quite that deep into the weeds about that. It does indicate that if both students are wearing well-fitted masks, that they would be exempt from quarantine. I will just say, if you extrapolate that out, if you have a strongly recommended, then that means that we would then have to monitor on a daily basis mask wearing and compliance by every kid in every classroom.
So logistically, that would be
Logistically, it would
very
be
difficult.
very difficult. I would say that, yes.
you'd have to go back 3 days and say, okay, who was wearing their mask and
Correct.
who wasn't?
Correct.
So it's not feasible.
It would certainly take some complicated logistics to make that happen. Something, one of you had a thought that I wanted to address, and I, for the life of me, lost it right when you asked that question. If we go back, what were you,
Well, we were talking about the recommendation.
just before that?
Hmm.
Just saying, So if the kids consistently were wearing the top-rated school supplied masks, in that case, like if the teacher, yes, you know, Joey and Annie always, you know, wore the K95 mask, so in that case, I mean, if they're consistently doing that, that could be where you'd say, okay, yeah, fair enough, you know, these kids were supplied it, they wore it.
Right. Yes, yep, if everybody was wearing it. And what I thought about was, I just wanted to add, if that is the case where all students are masked and we don't need to quarantine, just to be clear, we would still do contact tracing to identify those students that would have been identified as a close contact, to notify the families that, you know, your child had an exposure, both students had masks on, but here's what we would recommend. We still want to make parents aware of that information, so we would still complete contact tracing on those COVID positive cases and inform families. They just wouldn't need to do the quarantine piece if mask wearing is done on a consistent basis.
Thank you, Annie. Mark?
So I'm a little dense sometimes. So if we have mandatory masking, you're really not looking at quarantining unless there's a home contact.
Correct.
Yeah.
And even if it was a home contact, if they meet those criteria for exemptions, they would still not need to quarantine.
Then you wouldn't have to play the logistical search game of who wore a mask 3 days ago.
That is accurate. Yep, and again, I think we've expressed previously that when we do contact tracing, in the event of an asymptomatic COVID case, we look 2 days prior to their COVID test, and if it is if it's a symptomatic testing, we look 2 days before their symptoms started for contact tracing.
Follow up. Do we have any data on school days lost last year in the district from quarantining?
I think, I've given you some of those data.
I'm sure you have.
We could it would probably take work, but I bet we could extrapolate it because we did code COVID absences differently when they were quarantined. So with a little bit of time and effort, we could likely look at the impact of school days lost to quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
And to that, we didn't have nearly this many exclusions beforehand, before this year, correct?
Quarantine exclusion. You mean
Quarantine exclusions, yes.
Oh, no, because people weren't vaccinated,
Right.
or there were just a very small handful who had an active infection that met that criteria. Correct. We would assume obviously, again, with our immunization rates, we would assume that there would be a larger number of students, particularly at that 12 and older grade, that would meet those exemptions from quarantine.
Good. I know, Katie?
Two questions. You gave us the percentage of high school vaccinated, 71%. Do we have any idea at that middle school level?
Yeah, I don't think it's as pure of data yet, correct?
Correct.
But it's about 64% at the middle school, but that's not as good a number as far as reliability as the high school number is. So we'll get that number cleaned up and clarified. But it's still pretty good for kids.
And looking at the mask alternatives, hearing how difficult it is with the recommendation for the quarantining exemption on masks, how would that happen at a middle school level where you have 6, 7, 8, but the mask requirement would go just 6 and 7 in the middle school level, based on that one alternative recommendation?
It would anticipate kind of a blend, if you will, of the two models.
Will it be just as hard for teachers and staff is it more of a, what am I trying to say? Is it something more that they have to enforce by age, looking in the hallways, if it's a 6th grader versus an 8th grader?
Most of it's in the classroom, and we don't have a lot of mixing of grades in different classes. The one aspect that could be tricky is if you have 8th graders who are not 12.
Okay.
So, but that's such a small number.
Well,
If
there
any,
can
if any.
be seventh graders in eighth grade classes sometimes too.
Yeah, I said it was, we don't do much of that.
Okay. Okay.
Lisa?
I guess I kind of want to take a step back here because we're getting deep in the mask weeds already. And, I think it's really important as we're talking about this plan to talk about some of the foundational stuff that we have here. Because I don't think that mask issue is the only thing, right, that we need to talk about. I think, first and foremost in my mind as I was reading through all this, number one, I think that my personal priority, and I think what we heard from the community, is that we want to keep kids in school, right? So as I'm reading through everything, I'm saying to myself, what choices can we make to keep kids in school? Kids do better in school, that's what we've heard, that's what the studies have shown. How do we keep kids in the classroom? Nothing's gonna be perfect. If you look at the comments that we got, they were pretty much an even split between pro and con. The districts that have made decisions are pretty much an even split between required and strongly recommended. There's only 2 districts on the list so far that we saw from like the CARE 11 list that didn't require anything, and then there's another 7 that haven't made a decision yet. I think people need to know. I think the science is gonna change a lot. I think COVID has changed and adapted it. It's a virus, it's very sophisticated, right? Our knowledge of it and how to fight it has changed a lot. And I think that layering strategies have to be utilized. We're talking about cleaning and social distancing and, encouraging vaccinations, which have been proven to be very successful in a lot of cases. I know some people don't, that's controversial and everyone can make their own decision, but, to allow those expectations and testing and knowledge, I think are all really important things. And, you have all those things layering on top of each other. I think it's really important for us to stop and recognize that that's all going on in this plan, right? Before we get down into the masks, it can't just only be masks, right? That can't be the only thing that we care about. And I don't want people that are watching this or our staff or all of us to lose sight of the fact that all of these other things are so super important for this to be successful. And at the end of the day, we want to keep kids in school, right? At least that's my priority, right? So, if you go through all of that, right, are there any of these other things that we need to talk about besides the masks? Because I don't want to go, too far down the mask train before we talk about all this other stuff. That's all, I think layering is equally important. Even the, all the things that we're talking about, mental health support and academic support, hugely important.
I think a subset to keeping kids in school is also fostering a learning environment that they can thrive in.
Yeah.
And we have to weigh that. I think that is, something that we really need to consider, that taking all these things, and all the feedback that we've gotten, and I think that's going to help us to make the most balanced decision. Like Lisa said, it's basically half and half. So we're not going to please half of our district with anything that we do. But I think Lisa's point to really talk about all the things that we've learned, and it was a couple of meetings ago, I didn't bring it, but we got all the lessons learned from COVID.
Right.
And how we're able to deliver lessons and do things differently, how the kids are moving throughout the school. A combination of lunches and pods and all of those things. There's so many things that we are doing, more than just a few controversial things. I think the vaccines especially changes the game and allows those exemptions, and so I think we can keep kids in school. And hearing that 71% of the high schoolers and maybe 64% of the middle schoolers, that's going to change that curve a lot. Yeah, sorry, I cut Lisa off and then I stopped talking.
That's great.
Katie?
Thanks for having us take a step back. As I look at it, in-person learning is really my number one goal also, which made me jump to the quarantining piece of it, because what is our plan as a district if kids are quarantined? We don't have that streaming option this year. So I immediately just went to, what are those exemptions? So it's really important to take a look at everything that we're doing to make sure that it's that layered approach and what it is, because what we heard from countless emails, so thank you to everybody that has sent them, and everybody that was here tonight that spoke. In-person learning was really what everybody, hands down, regardless of where you were at on the mask, that's what everybody wants. And so when we look at this, that's really what I was looking at. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind with that layering approach of what all the things the district is doing, all the precautions and everything that we have in place. So thanks for having us take a step back.
Well, just to piggyback on what Katie said, one thing maybe to talk a little bit about is, we talked about the difference in exemptions for quarantining, but quarantining is going to look different this year as well. And maybe you can talk about that. I mean, Katie touched on it, that there isn't a streaming option for those that have to quarantine. What are our plans, or how can we mitigate and make use of that time at home, especially when we don't have that streaming option?
Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
Okay. Mike?
Yeah, so Lisa, I appreciate what you're saying, because sometimes, since we've discussed it so much, of how much money we've spent on getting all the ventilators in there and taking all these safety precautions last year, because Paul really moved on it quickly, right? And there's so many successes, that we had last year, so it's a good point to take a step back and say, we made a significant commitment, and it cost us, you can see it in obviously our budget numbers, how much money we spent, so I think that's fair and appropriate, and I do think that it's pretty, everyone that came and spoke to us today, everyone wants to, not everyone, but the majority of people want to get their kids back in school. So that's the number one priority for us, and we know that from a mental health, and wellness standpoint, for the lion's share of the kids, it's a better environment, for them to learn. There's still some that prefer to go e-learning, and they have that opportunity. So I think, so for me then, it's just to say, okay, I think the quarantine, just this new process will keep a lot more kids in school, right? Either the kids that had COVID last year, or kids that have been vaccinated, right? Will be a lot different. We'll have a lot more kids that, again, this will be their day-to-day. So again, what concerns me is just how, with this Delta variant, it spiked here recently. And so I'm hopeful, right, that maybe to the extent it spikes and it starts to taper off, but I hope we still have the control of it and it doesn't come back that, Minnesota state government says, okay, you're gonna have to go to e-learning for everybody again. So then for me, it's just, so that's why I was kind of gravitating towards the masks, to understand logistically, how we'd handle it, because everything else here, I think it's been, again, we've digested a lot, but again, for the greater good in the community, they haven't heard all those discussions. So everything else to me was, I'll say best in class. So it was just in the masking side of it, what, to me, I just want to understand logistically, if we said, again, people that have been, already vaccinated, is there any flexibility? And if we did do that, what would that look like? I mean, is it truly something that, we could implement and implement well across the schools? So.
So, I guess, Chris, the question we need to ask ourselves is, are there any other components of this plan besides the masking piece of it that that people want to talk about or make a different decision on, right? Because all that layering, like I said, is super important, A, and B, as we've talked about, but I mean, if you look at the 14-day trends for COVID, for Hennepin County, I'm just gonna pick, because, the story is the same for every line on this chart. June 22nd, it was 2.9 per 10,000 residents, and July 27th, it was 23.4. It's like, so if we had made a decision on June 22nd, we'd be looking at
Right.
July 27th going, oh, whoops, you know? So I think the other thing that whatever we decide has to have some flexibility in it, and we have to be nimble and willing to have lots of conversation and, you know, whatever, because I don't think you can decide, I mean, we just don't know, right? We don't know what's gonna happen.
Go ahead.
So, absolutely agree, we have to have some flexibility, and it is a couple weeks before school starts yet, so this number is going to change. One of the things that I would like for the board to consider is actually voting on maybe it's the masking piece, but more of this, you know, you said we have the option to make a decision more on September 2nd, but we have our back-to-school events happening, we have our staff coming back into our buildings. I think it would be really, really important to start that out before, or to provide that information to our community and to our staff and to our families to know what our expectation is to start the school year. So I would like to make a decision on some of this tonight versus moving it down to September 2nd. So,
Can we follow up on Lisa's comment about going through the rest of the plan to see if there's anything else?
Yeah.
We want to talk about? Because I think, that's been brought up a couple of times, and I think that would be
Yeah, sure.
an
I can walk us
exercise.
through.
If you want to do
Yeah.
that, Chris, thank you.
Yeah, so we'll just walk to the learning model for all grades. So basically, in-person learning with an e-learning option, except for immersion. And there is a possibility or some flexibility that if enough enroll, that we can do that. Yep,
Comments?
yep.
Yeah, so, for those at home who haven't been following the Minnetonka Schools progress from the online perspective, right, most don't know that particularly at the high school, our classes have all been NCAA accredited, right? So all the colleges will take them, and we've tracked test scores at the high school level. We've actually seen kids in online classes score higher in a lot of cases than their bricks and mortar counterparts. So I think when we go through this, there's a lot of detail that we've been living with for some of us 8, 9, 12 years that I think is buried in the nuances around the recommendations, and I think it's worth highlighting those.
No, thank you, John. Yep.
so for families that would like to make a decision and still move into e-learning, do they have the opportunity up until when to contact the district? Is
Well,
there-
you know how we operate.
Uh-huh,
We set a date and then we'll work with people. So we're still working with people.
okay,
Because we know it's not fair to shut it off before the board makes a decision.
okay. Okay, so families still
I mean,
do have,
that's putting a lot of burden on, administration to
Mhm.
scramble and get all that done, and maybe even some teachers, but it's what we do.
okay.
I did have one question on the learning model. Dr. Peterson, you had made mention that we would be prepared to shift to virtual learning if something happened or the governor dictated. Does that mean basically K-12, they'll be issued iPads, or they'll be available, or would we not worry about, or we could shift pretty quickly, or how would we do that?
Yeah. Most students will have their iPads now, and will know how to use them.
Yep.
So it could be that you find a school that maybe needs to be put on e-learning only. Could be, some grades maybe. So, I think we need to look at that very surgically
Yeah.
if that happens, and not just put everybody on. The reality is, and I know months have gone by since we've moved in December to put everybody on e-learning. That was because we couldn't get enough people to supervise. We couldn't get enough reserves in place for the staff who were out. And so it wasn't because of COVID per se, it was the result of COVID affecting staff. So, we'll be ready to make that shift if we have to.
Yeah.
And,
Good.
and most people have experienced it.
And I think it's important that we've passed, K through 12, 1-to-1, if needed. Now I think we're at our 3-year contract, so students will be getting least, fourth up,
Yeah,
we'll be getting
more this time.
new iPads, so we'll have plenty of hardware available
Yep.
if that is needed. There was a hand up.
I guess the
Yeah.
only other thing I think that, it's not necessarily in here, but maybe it's implicit in this learning model is that we're committed to the excellence for all
Mhm.
students.
Sure.
And, I think that that's what we want to deliver first and foremost, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, maybe we don't say it enough because we
Right.
just know it's, ingrained, but I think it bears repeating for people that, an excellent education, even in the COVID environment, is really important.
Absolutely.
Any more comments on the learning model for all grades section? Moving on to buses, it doesn't seem like we have a lot of flexibility or, changes to that. I'm glad that we will continue to clean and leave windows open and do as much as we can. I think that is part of that layering that Lisa talked about, and will continue to be good. Any questions, comments on the busing? Arrival into the building. Will this mirror a more normal year, or will it continue to some of the best practices
More from last year.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think this is something to make mention that the arrival process is much different now than it has been if you've been to any of the buildings or seen, especially to the younger ages, and getting kids in and out with as much social distancing is important.
I got one on that, and it kind of ties in to 2 pages later where the temperature taking expectations. Now, in this last year, arrival into the building, especially for the elementary kids, they took their temperatures.
Mhm.
Will they continue to do that?
Yeah, that's the intention. But again, we didn't catch many kids with high fevers last
Right.
year. And many districts didn't even do this. So, early on, the message was that the sure indicator of COVID was a fever. Well, it turned out not to be.
Not true, yeah.
And but we kept doing it because we felt we needed that layer.
So we may do it or we may not.
Right now, we plan to.
Okay. Okay. That's just another layering thing, even
Yeah,
if
I mean,
it
if the
doesn't
board
catch
decided
many.
not to, that's fine too.
Okay.
But, yeah,
I think some of that helps, that we've figured out how to get all them in single file and get them all
Yeah.
tested and stuff.
Yeah.
But that helps corral them into,
right.
and keep distance.
See, we had originally last year thought we would go out and check every kid before they got on the bus. Then fortunately, we had some cool weather in early September and found out that nobody has a temperature taking device that will detect anything when the outside temperature is below 50. So, and we haven't found one since. So, we dropped that idea, but that was part of our plan to be that
Sure.
redundant.
Sure.
Great. Any more on arrival to the building? How about lunchrooms? I can start. I like the idea of the flexibility a little bit more, where you can really distance kids out even more, but still provide some of that normal lunch environment. So I don't know, is the plan to, maybe in elementary schools, that you would cycle classrooms through, or would they kind of choose if they wanted to go in?
Yeah,
I mean, I know it'd
I
be
think they're
building by
still
building. Yeah.
working on that, yeah,
But I like the flexibility because you can spread them out even more.
yeah, right.
Anybody else, any changes?
That district did a really nice job last year with that.
Mhm.
Yeah, same.
They were really good.
Passing from class to class. So it sounds like we will still have, the lanes and all the floor and signs. And getting people to go to class.
Yep.
Anybody else? Ventilation and air cleaning. we've talked a lot about this, but I think this is one of the biggest things that sets us apart from probably anybody else, and a huge portion is Paul really, Dr. Peterson, Paul, really jumping on that. We've been proactive with our big air handlers. You can see that in the long-term maintenance, as well as the HEPA filters that are in every room. I think that has provided an extra layer of protection that it will continue to help us.
And the extra filters that we bought too, you know, those guys.
Yes, yep. Anything from the board? We talked about the temperature taking expectations, promoting good hygiene and health behaviors.
You know, I think that's another one that's so important. I mean, just for the spread of all kinds of things, not even just COVID, but, you know, colds and flus and
Yeah.
whatever all else. I mean, I don't want to see us, you know, again, get so caught up in the discussion about one particular item that we lose track of how important all that hand washing is. And,
Right.
you know, students who are ill should stay home, staff who are ill should stay home, people who have, you know, interacted with somebody need to make the right decision about it. If they have COVID symptoms and they're waiting to hear, you know, those kinds of things, I think we need to keep reminding people of. Because if we don't have the, you know, COVID positive coming to school, then that keeps the spread down.
Yep. Dr. Peterson talking about, well, I think it's actually later. Forget it. I was talking about cleaning. Any more on promoting good hygiene or health behaviors?
Question. We're still planning, I know Paul bought practically a swimming pool full of hand sanitizer last year.
Yeah.
We're still planning on making that available throughout the building?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Probably is.
we have so many barrels of that stuff.
Which is good.
Good problem to have.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Great. I will, we'll move to, we can come back. We'll go to social distancing expectations.
So by reading this, it looks as if it will be how we ended the school year last year with the 3 feet,
Yeah,
correct?
right.
Yeah.
And we did not bring back a lot of the furniture that had been there before COVID came along. So we aren't crowding the classrooms with furniture and all yet. So that'll probably come back eventually.
Any more on social distancing? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, we did, again, Dr. Peterson, to your credit, we did an amazing job with the building leaders, making sure we followed that, and I think that was one of the big efforts of our layering that caused things to be successful. And your point 3 on this, but if we do see issues, right, where you start to see, you know, problems in the classroom, maintaining social distancing and those things, you kind of revert back to consider turning all desks to face in the same direction, right,
Yeah.
rather than facing each other.
Right.
And when I think about success in my mind, keeping kids safe, keeping them in school and maximizing learning, right? If we find ourselves in a situation where things get out of control and we start to flip back into row-to-row seating, you lose a lot of what makes our school curriculum
It
special.
does, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a point that we're hearing, that kids are not experiencing school the way school's been. It just, I mean, we need these protocols, but it's not the richness that they've had. You know, it's like not wanting them to stop and talk to each other in the hallway. That's part of social life. And, you know, so that changes.
Encouragement to be vaccinated. I know, I don't know how much we can do that as a school district, but we can.
Yeah, I mean,
Lisa?
we're certainly not gonna force anybody to, or really put it on them, but, you know, there are a lot of efforts around the state and around the country to get people vaccinated. And, you know, I also realize there are people who just don't wanna even hear that.
Lisa?
I was just gonna say, I understand this is a really controversial topic, and I fully respect everybody's right to make their own decision for their family. But I think that it's short-sighted of us not to see that that's a piece of the layering that we need to encourage. And, you know, every family can make their own decision, but, you know, they just have to realize that there are gonna be certain, I don't wanna say consequences, but there's gonna be certain parameters that are gonna happen in society and in, you know, because of different statuses. I mean, you can see it now, you know, you can't travel here if you haven't had the vaccine, but if you have, you can, you know, and then some cases, like, everybody has to have a test to get back into the US if you go outside the country, right? So, you know, I mean, I don't think that, you know, I fully appreciate everybody that wants to make that own decision for their kids, but I think it's important to note that, you know, the clinics that were held in our buildings were not held by us.
No.
Mm-mm.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, and if we're trying to give in consideration to people that don't have as easy of a time of getting to the doctor or getting access or whatever, and that tends to be people who are more, you know, socioeconomically disadvantaged and have healthcare challenges. I don't want to see people miss out, right?
Yeah.
So.
And I think it's important to add in that, you know, those vaccines or any testing or anything that would never be performed without a parent consent.
Absolutely.
Or all of those things. So that, you know, I mean, my expectation is that, I'm sure all of ours and anybody, any one of our administration is.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
So a comment on that. You know, I have two kids in college, University of Minnesota and UW Stout. And what we're hearing come through the colleges is once these vaccines are FDA approved, they might make those as a requirement like any other measles, mumps, rubella, you know, communicable disease for entrance into college. So I think that's going to be one we're just going to have to watch is right now there's a certain list of vaccines you have to attend school. And once that flips to FDA approved, then we might find ourselves with different language in this.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of colleges are requiring it now anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, but the discussion here isn't.
Oh, gosh, no.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
I just want to
absolutely
clarify.
did not say
Yeah, it's-
that.
I know.
No.
I just
I
want to make
absolutely
sure
did
that
not say
that is clear.
No.
Yeah.
I appreciate the
Encourage,
clarification.
for sure,
Yes.
yes. Okay.
Chris,
And great point, John.
there were a couple of comments or questions that were brought up during community comments. Dr. Peterson, do we have plans at this time to have another vaccine clinic in the near future? And then the other question somebody had raised was something about us receiving money for having that.
Yeah. I never heard that.
Yeah, some of these stories are just beyond me.
Okay,
How they're coming about, and people are just guessing.
okay. So the
But,
district has
yeah,
not.
I mean, we have not been, there's really no need for major clinics right now because, you know, we're down to a much smaller number of kids who might be vaccinated or adults who might be vaccinated. If the younger children are able to get the vaccine, you know, we'll have to reevaluate that.
But
But I mean, frankly, I never expect to be criticized for opening the door for somebody to come in and vaccinate students, and yet, you know, there's criticism on everything we do anymore.
okay. Thanks.
Good. Expectations for testing for COVID? They talked about the district will continue to on-site testing for staff. We anticipate the state will expand opportunities for testing for students, and will provide that. What does that look like? Especially for students. Staff, obviously, are all adults, but if we were to offer testing for students, what does that, look like? Parents can request it, or,
Yeah, we'd have some way for them to get permission.
yeah,
But also woven in here is the fact that we're gonna also find an outside provider for the second week of the 2-week cycle. So the
Okay.
state right now is on a 2-week cycle.
Yep.
We're gonna try to lobby that, we'll lobby them to have every week.
Okay,
But if we, in order to enforce some of our other expectations, we've got to have more regular testing than that.
so the state is supporting with resources the option for every two-week
weeks,
testing.
Right.
We would add in
We'd add another
week,
week in there.
either at district expense or at state expense, if that,
Yeah, right now we intend to use district expense if we
Yep.
have to. Because this is gonna be an important, testing is gonna be important now. The virus moves quicker, and, you know, we've got some quarantines that depend upon testing and so forth. Are there more questions on that?
Community, I've heard community questions. Do we know how many of our teachers are vaccinated? I know we've talked about that, but can you share?
Well, we still believe that the legal position is you can ask.
Correct.
So we believe that, you know, nearly all of them are vaccinated. We don't have an exact number.
So for those that are unvaccinated, there's the, right now, 2-week, we're working on that weekly testing for all
Say that
all
again,
staff.
I'm missing something.
The testing
Yeah,
for,
for the testing,
yes. It's gonna be,
we're gonna offer weekly testing.
okay,
And right now, we would have to provide that second week ourselves.
okay, I got it now.
for all staff to get tested,
Yeah,
yeah.
but there's no requirement to get tested.
It's all optional.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
And same for students, right?
yeah,
yeah, same.
What kind of testing results, or not results, but numbers did you have from our staff last year?
Annie, do you have some help there?
If you give me about 5 minutes, I could probably tell you the percentage of our overall staff
That'd
that
be-
tested each week.
Okay.
Yes, I will get that to you.
Thanks, Annie. Brain teaser this late at night, right?
Any other questions, comments, expectations for testing for COVID?
so, one more.
Yeah,
Last meeting, when we talked, you were still exploring the possible optional testing for students. And has anything more come to that we should share? Or are we still waiting to hear more from the state on the testing kits that would be sent home for students? I don't know the name
Yeah,
of.
I mean, there will be tests that they can get and test at home,
Okay,
but they still have to go through some steps. in order to
Absolutely.
Make sure it's a valid test.
okay,
I think that's through the state, the vault.
Yeah,
okay,
The same mail-at-home kits that we can.
but we had some, in the first plan that I presented to you, we had more testing in there to avoid quarantines, and we decided to go with the state recommendation on quarantining.
okay.
And not try to use all those testing. That gets pretty elaborate to try to follow those tests.
Okay, okay.
Okay, data. So as a district, the state started offering us testing for our staff on a every 2-week basis. We began that January 25th of 2021. And the percentage of staff that overall in the district that tested was 15%. That went up to 20% 2 weeks later, 18%, 14%, 15%, 9%, 12%, 11%, and then 8% at the end of the year.
Okay.
So that was our overall percentage each. And again, we tested every 2 weeks, so that was the overall uptake of, and that reflects all staff
Okay.
in the district.
Thank you. It was less than 5 minutes.
Great, excluding for illness. So this is, as Dr. Peterson said, taking the MDE's exclusion decision tree for
MDH,
MDH, what did I say?
MDE.
Yeah, it's late. Decision tree for students with COVID-19. Any questions or comments?
No, I think that's the smart plan.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that's. Contact tracing and quarantine requirements. This is, I would say all the way through process when, I think that's pretty standard, the process when informed of a lab confirmed COVID positive case. I think that makes sense.
Hey, Chris,
Yeah,
so question, like if we go into that contract tracing and quarantine requirements, sentence 4, it
Yep.
says close contacts who have been vaccinated or COVID previously will not be quarantined. But then you go to the other section, it says Minnetonka schools will be following a 5-day quarantine for those identified as a close contact of a COVID positive person.
Annie, could you help me out here?
So again, they would be exempt from quarantine if they were fully vaccinated. And we have those exemptions following the quarantine guidelines. So if somebody had an exposure and was identified as a close contact, they would kind of fall into two different categories. One would be, would they be exempt from quarantine for any reason? And that could be because of an active infection within the last 90 days or because they were fully vaccinated. So they would follow one path for an exemption. Otherwise, let's say it is a 10-year-old student that did not have a COVID infection, did not have the vaccine. They were identified as a close contact. So the intent would be that they would need to follow a 5-day quarantine process and then have a negative molecular test to return to school anytime after that 5th day of quarantine. So that way we are limiting their time out of school, but then also ensuring that they are negative for COVID before they return.
Okay, so just one quick follow-up question. So for the language about close contacts who have been vaccinated or previously had COVID, is that our language or is that pulled from the CDC and the FDA?
So the Department of Health has language that if somebody has been fully vaccinated, and again, defined as 2 weeks
Yep,
out from their
yep.
last dose, or has had an active COVID infection within the last 90 days, that is Minnesota Department of Health language.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
yeah, John, to your point, do we need to add that, or does it really go to the exclusions at that point? Or are you kind of splitting hairs? Right, because it's saying close contacts who have been vaccinated, obviously 14 days, or had COVID previously within 90 days.
Within 90 days, yeah.
I mean, so really, that I guess spells out, but I think it's a great point. I don't know why you would need to add it there, because it's really, it's spelled out in the exemptions, but.
Well, and I think in all cases, right, when this happens, they're gonna be working with Annie and her team
Yeah,
to understand what they're supposed to do
Yeah.
anyways, right?
sure.
I mean, I think it's mostly important for people to know ahead of time so they have some expectation of what's gonna happen. But when they actually have to do it, they're gonna have a school nurse or somebody walking them through it, right?
Right.
So,
But there will be people who present the theoretical case to us to tell them how to go.
of course.
Okay, so process when informed, I think goes without saying too, that, any positive test needs to be communicated as soon as possible so that we can start following this process. So can't say that enough for this to work. Quarantine and isolation guidelines. And again, this is the MDH protocol,
Right,
mostly?
yep. The detail is, yeah.
Okay.
What are the differences?
Compared to what?
MDH.
The question is, what are the differences between our quarantine and isolation guidelines to the MDH?
I think these are basically their days.
The 10 days,
Yeah, I
the
mean, we may have
5-day?
used our language, but it's still their days. Annie, anything you want to add there?
At this point, I would add that the Minnesota Department of Health still recommends a 14-day quarantine as best practice. This plan really reflects, again, trying to honor that desire to keep kids in school as much as possible while also striving to keep our kids safe. What we know about the new Delta variant is, again, it is you are more likely to develop symptoms more quickly. So we felt that, again, trying to balance out keeping kids out if they potentially could become positive, that we could reduce that 14-day quarantine. So our standard quarantine, if parents choose not to test, would be a 10-day. They could then request a shortened quarantine by undergoing a molecular test, again, on or after day 5, so that their child or a staff member, if they had an exposure to and were unvaccinated, could return more quickly. Again, balancing out that we don't want kids to be sick in school, spreading infection, knowing that with this new Delta variant, we're usually seeing an infectious period within 4 days, that if somebody is infected, they would likely test positive. So we actually, the recommendations are still a little bit higher. As a district, we have made the recommendation to deviate down in an attempt to try to, again, keep kids safe, but also get them back into school as quickly as possible.
Thanks.
Thanks for the clarification. Anything more on quarantine and isolation guidelines?
So Chris, just make sure I get the English version of it. If they come into contact, they're gonna go into quarantine. At the end of 5 days, if you wanna come back to school, you have to get you have to get tested, and it's gotta be a negative test. I
Right,
see.
right.
Okay. Otherwise, you're on the 10-day path,
Or somewhere in between.
or 14, or,
If you choose not to test, then you would have to complete the 10-day. Or if you had a positive test, then that's a different ballgame.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, that's an important one, right?
Yes. Details.
Great. Good.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay, exemptions from quarantine. I think this is one of the last two things are one of the, I would say, two big changes that should really affect our goal of keeping kids in school, is shortening up that and offering paths to shorten up the quarantine period. I think that's great. And then the exemptions that following the guidelines. So, fully vaccinated, shortens up, or they don't have to quarantine at all. Anybody? All good? Yep. Hey, John.
Yeah, I think, overall, as we think about last year versus this year, we had a number of kids, who were ran into people with positive, right, that had gone to quarantine. But because we had the dual learning model, right, in person and online, it really wasn't that disruptive to families or kids. It was inconvenience, but it really didn't set kids back. I do worry. My number one worry is this: if you start sending kids home in mass in quarantine, where now you talk their parents into being teachers, and then they got to be babysitters, and and then it impacts their work. I think that's going to be major disruption. And I know, Annie, you said it would take some time to come up with that number, but I gotta believe it was probably 100 kids, or maybe 200 or 300 kids, like the course of the year, that we sent home for 10 or 14 days. And that will be extremely disruptive to the learning process and disruptive to the families that have their kids at home unexpectedly.
Amy, do you want to talk a little about where we are with our discussions? I hate to put you on the spot,
No,
but
that's fine. Just as far as when kids are quarantining, what we'll do instructionally,
yeah.
right? So, this past year, obviously, for the middle school and high school, throughout the spring, we continued to have streaming as an option. At the elementary, it was a little bit more of a blended quarantining model. With the 5-day, we feel like we could send work home with kids with some guidance and support, much like we would if they were sick or gone on vacation. With the governor's executive order expiring, some of the pathways and some of the things that we were doing, we're still trying to figure out how we can best do them. So at this point, we don't have a great option to have kids live stream on demand, but we continue to explore our options with that as we've worked with the MTA.
So the legislature had a chance to solve this, and they just couldn't come to a conclusion.
Right.
So we're really back to the old language, frankly, on this. And I think that was a major miss on their part, because kids throughout the state were doing okay with virtual learning when they had to. And, you know, they could have helped us clean this up, so we could have provided that. But, you know, we can still work on it locally, we believe. So we haven't given up.
Right. Thanks.
Great points, John. Exemptions and quarantine. Maintaining a safe environment. The question I had a little bit before is, are we, in some cases, I don't know if it was district-wide, but I think in the middle school and in some, especially when they were changing classes, that we had students wiping surfaces down and doing things in between classes. I mean, all of that stuff still.
Yeah, we'll still use some of that. It's a good experience for them. And, you know, if they don't feel like it's, you know, sensitive skin or whatever, why,
Sure.
they can do that.
Sure. But it'll be available, and
Yeah.
schools will
Right.
implement it as much or as little. You know, they'll have some flexibility, I guess. Any questions or comments? Athletic and other activities, I think with the Minnesota State High School League, we need some guidance from them. Obviously, we fall underneath them for athletics, clubs, and everything else, you know, we can handle internally. Lisa?
Do we know when that guidance is coming from them? Have they given any indication?
They've given some guidance so far. But, you know, they work with MDH in particular regularly, and so they could change on a dime, you know, what their requirements are.
Do we know how this will be, affect the spectators?
Right now, we think there'll be normal kind of seating for spectators.
Okay.
Anybody else? Mental health and academic support. I think, you know, it's something that we've been working on, especially mental health with Goal 1. And I think we've learned a ton about the different options, things that worked, that didn't work as well. And created a lot of opportunities to provide support for students and families. I think that was for sure a highlight on this. Lisa?
I just would reiterate, like I said before, I think those are two really important components about our plan that, you know, need to be given the care and attention and resources that they need.
Yeah. Katie?
One thing that might, hopefully will look differently this year is allowing parents and volunteering in our buildings. Has it been discussed in here, or is there any recommendation?
Yeah, we haven't spelled that out at all yet, so it's something we probably should talk more about.
Okay.
You know, we're trying to limit visitors as much as we can yet, because I think it makes people uneasy to have visitors there, so we'll work through that. But if the board wants more guidance, they should give it to us.
I just know families miss it.
Sure,
So-
I do.
I'll lump this into academic support, just because it kind of fits there, but I think for many parents I talked to, having the parent-teacher conferences on Zoom
Yeah.
was a huge plus, right?
Yeah.
Because they knew
Yeah.
they had their slotted time, they could, you know, both parents, you know, could join, and it was very efficient and effective, so one positive takeaway was I think that experience.
And I think there'll be some open houses, curriculum nights done that way too.
I think and the teachers also, the ones I talked to,
Sure.
also it was a positive experience for them too.
Yeah.
Great point, Mike. On the academic support, I think we heard from at least a couple of community comments about the academic programming and the offering, and even the improved virtual options. And so I think that is academic support in itself, being able to offer virtual as well as in person, and accommodating that for families to have more choices. Great, all right.
Back to the
It's still today. Face covering expectations. I will open it up to the board.
Yeah, so again, what I'd like to understand, just again, the possibility, or what the logistics would look like if we said those that were vaccinated didn't have to wear masks. Let's just start out the high schoolers. If he said that was the policy, how would we implement that?
How would you prove it?
Yeah, how would you prove it, and then what would that look like?
Well, we would, I think initially, have an honor system. But, you know, as we hear information that, you know, Mike has said he's vaccinated and everybody knows he isn't, you know, then we'd have to deal with it. So, you know, the honor system, you know, would probably be the best way to do it. There would be some possible, you know, back and forth if you were wearing a mask around and, you know, why don't you get your vaccine and all that. That's just gonna be the exchange between kids. As much as I hate that, you know, we can't keep them from saying things to each other about their situation.
And some even if they were vaccinated, may still decide to wear masks too,
Yeah.
right? So,
And I think we should probably also, if they've had COVID, that's a powerful tool for, you know, being immune. So, you know, we'd have to verify some of those things too.
and just follow, I mean, because to me, again, you know, it's great to hear 71% have been vaccinated at the high school, because that is the highest layer of support today, and the efficacy rates of vaccination, so it's that. And then, at least from the quarantine, they get that benefit, right? So they don't have to be quarantined if they've gotten vaccinated or if they've had it before. And I was just wondering too, it's, again, as a further incentive, right? They wouldn't have to wear masks, you know, in school, but
Yeah.
I do agree that would be one of the issues, is there could be a lot of peer pressure to students that decide not to be vaccinated, and that would be something we'd have to work through, certainly, addressing that.
I mean, the legislature has been dealing with lunch shaming, and so, you know, that's been a big issue to them, that kids who are on free or reduced were, you know, being treated one way, and then kids who hadn't paid their bill were, you know, shamed, and their food would be dumped in the trash and things like that. So I have a feeling the legislature would dive in on something like this if we had that distinction between mask wearers and not, you know, vaccination. Just a supposition.
Sure.
Okay, I'm gonna lob it out there, cause, you know, I just am, right? I mean, I want kids in school, that's my top priority. I look at these case numbers, they're just getting worse. Every time I turn around, more and more and more and more things are requiring masks. I'm not a fan of wearing a mask. I don't love wearing a mask. I got my vaccine, all that stuff. But I guess, you know, I'd rather be more conservative at the beginning and revisit this in 30 days and be able to say, oh, nope, we're good, don't need it anymore, than to try and unring that bell, and now all of a sudden everybody's at home and people are sick and, you know, whatever. So I guess I personally would lean towards alternative 3, with the exception of, I think I would just go K-8. I think it's just too difficult to split hairs in the middle school. You know, I don't want that one poor 7th grader who's in the 8th grade class, maybe there's 2 of them, but I mean, you know, they already feels, it's already difficult for them because they're a 7th grader in a class of 8th graders. I don't want them to be the one kid wearing a mask also, right? So I think just make it easy, you know, High schoolers, 71% of them are vaccinated. Strongly recommend masks for those that aren't. Your choice if you want to wear masks. I think we need language like masks are welcomed, not allowed, because I think that sounds too prickly to me. But I just don't feel comfortable only recommending masks.
I'll go next.
So.
So there are 4 districts that are doing something similar to that already.
Yeah.
I'll bore you with my professional background. Running air traffic and getting ready for a peak arrival rush, where I've got several hundred planes coming in and I've got thunderstorms that are very quickly moving. And we don't know exactly where they're going to go. We would always be very conservative, lower numbers until we know what's going to happen. And then we could raise it up. Because if you do it the other way around and you get caught with too many aircraft and all of a sudden the weather goes to heck, then you have nowhere to go. My inclination would be, along with Lisa's, is to start conservatively, because we have numbers and we don't know where they're going to go. We don't know how the Delta virus is going to just explode, or if we're at a peak and start going down. My feeling is that if we start conservatively, then we can loosen it up. I would rather keep kids in school, if they're masked. We're not worried about the quarantine rates. I've been really thinking about, okay, do we just do the elementary schools? Well, we can't do that. And so I think I'm in agreement with Lisa about the elementary and middle schools, at least at first. But we don't know when the FDA is going to approve it. It could be at the end of the year. So there are just too many unknowns in this to just open it up for me. So that's kind of where I'm feeling.
Chris, and I meant to, if I could just add one thing. I would also, as a part of that, I think it's really critical that it's very clear to families that there are exemptions, medical exemptions for masks for kids that, for some reason or another, can't. I mean, we've heard some community comments about, that those types of things, and I think that we need to help those people to a path where it can be a comfortable situation for their student. But, I'll stop there.
Sorry, follow on. For Annie, we were restricted last year with some exemptions from the state, right?
No, so our district face covering policy did allow for an exemption. And so parents needed to request an exemption form, which needed to be filled out by a licensed prescriber.
Okay.
It was one piece that was used when we considered a mask exemption, and in the case of special education students, that child's IEP team came together to evaluate that exemption request. If it was a regular education student, there was usually the school nurse, district administrator, a teacher, and then me involved in that decision. And what's important to note is that when we looked at mask exemptions and determined if a child couldn't wear a traditional face covering, what other options would we have to not only keep them safe in school, but then to also keep other students safe? And oftentimes that then resulted in many situations, 6 different options of what that might look like for that child's mask exemption. And we really tried to give the parents as much voice and control in that as possible. Meaning that if a child couldn't wear a traditional face covering, what other options did we have? Were there shields available? If they were a shield, would then they need to be distanced farther from other students? So there were a number of different factors that went into that to try to ensure not only were we honoring that child's particular needs, but also ensuring their safety and the safety of those around them.
Anybody else? John?
Yeah, the headline is, I'm aligned with what Lisa brought, and I think I got there just a different way. So when I thought about priority one, keeping our kids safe, priority two, keeping them in school and maximizing learning, right? Like those are, as we were going through all these different policies, I went through and said, is this moving kids toward being in school more or moving away from being in school more? Is this moving towards maximized learning or away from maximized learning? And, you know, if you heard from a number of our speakers today or you listen to the experts, there's 3 things you can do to help kids stay safe in school, right? Physical distancing, and we just walked through the policy on that. And I think Minnetonka set the bar for a lot of the things that we did last year in keeping our kids safe. And I know that if we would have had the exemption this year where if both kids were masked, you wouldn't have had to go to quarantine, we would have had very few kids in quarantine last year. The second thing is vaccinations, right, which we heard 70% at the high school, 60% in the middle school, you know, or 60% in that 13, 14 range, right, and then obviously nothing below 12. And then barriers to transmission and across the population, right, and we've talked a lot about the barriers to transmission. We heard about that through many of the speakers tonight. But this year, as you think about this Delta, it's a different animal, right? It's got, you know, you heard some speakers talk about it, 1,000 times higher viral load. Maybe to our advantage, it's MIT just did a study comparing last year to this year, and it's at 3.17 days from exposure to infection, right? Which sets the basis for why you can actually get by with a shorter quarantine period because people are going to get infected much faster, which is actually 0.3, which is bad because it's actually causing it to spread like wildfire through our community. If you look at last year, August 1st, we were at 15 cases per 10,000. If you look at, so you go August 1st to August 18th last year, it was 15 to 14, same. If you actually go August 1st to August 18th this year, it went from 9 to 22. And when you think about that, that's with nobody 65 years old or older is not infected because 98% of them have been vaccinated. So now you're dealing with a virus of the younger populations, right? And you're seeing it show up in the hospitals. Tampa is, you know, where I used to live, and you start to look at these school districts that have opened up early with looser restrictions, right? Tampa right now has 8,000 kids in quarantine. Like that's just not something I want to be, right? I don't want to be a quarantine district. I want to be an in-person learning district. Georgia, you saw open, they went from full open to online in certain grades, you know, in Cobb County and others in a matter of a week, right? Again, that whiplash of going from open to we're going to full online is just something that I don't think anybody wants to subscribe to. And then we still haven't seen the impact of state fair yet, right? So last year, if you think about the numbers before and after through that month of August into enrollment, we didn't have a state fair. This year, it's a state fair mask optional. So like, who knows what that's gonna look like? And then we're also moving from warm weather people outside doing things what they should be doing to enclosed spaces again. So I think there is just so many variables right now for us to set a policy and plan on sticking to it for an extended period of time is foolish. And I do believe that starting more restrictive and relaxing as fast as reasonably possible is a much more prudent way of approaching it than starting looser and being in panic mode 4 or 5 weeks from now. And so, and again, as you think about all these kids potentially in quarantine, that's just no good for anybody. And so I think, you know, as was proposed, K through 8, we start the year in masks, we revisit that policy in 30, 45, 60 days, whatever point in time it is. We're all back in school, we're all in containment, we'll see how all of our mitigation strategies are going, and hopefully we're at the point where like, yeah, hey, we're actually in really good shape, right? Because as you brought it up, Dr. Peterson, and other people have brought it up, Minnetonka isn't representative of the United States, right? We go over and above, you know, our families are more engaged. I think they do a lot of things right, and we do a lot of things right as a district, and I think you add those two things together, and we end up in a much better spot, right? And you tried to lobby for us for that last year, when we tried to see if we could carve our school district out, because our affliction rates were lower, right, than the surrounding communities. I think we still have another run at that, but I think if you start open and then you have to restrict fast, that's way more disruptive than giving it 30 to 45 days and then say, okay, how far back can we open the aperture of choice?
Katie, Mike?
Just clarification, so what are we saying then for high school?
Well, we don't have a motion on the table. If you like, I can make a motion, then we would have one.
Well, I don't know if you guys have any other comments. I mean, from my standpoint, I would want to have some clear guidance to families on how we're going to look at that, when we're going to look at that, and what metrics are we going to use. Because to me, it just sounds like we're going to have a mask mandate, and we're just going to look at it. And it's going to be hard to take that away. I mean, I would want to have, I think that's going to have to be, because it's going to, once we go down the path, either one, it'll be a lot easier to add masks in if our quarantine is higher. But once we have masks, it's going to be difficult to remove that in 30 days. Or from my standpoint.
I guess, part of the reason why I suggested what I did was that I was kind of following what the state guidance had been before, which was when we got to 70%, the mask mandate went away. So that's why I'm thinking, high school would be strongly recommended for those who aren't vaccinated. Well, masks are welcomed for those who are just more comfortable. And, frankly, there are people that are fully vaccinated that I know that just like they feel more comfortable wearing a mask. And if they want to wear masks, I'll wear a mask with them. I mean, I have friends that are immunocompromised and don't want to go places, without a mask. So I put one on with them because they're my friend and I want them to feel comfortable, right? So, that's why I said high school, optional, strongly recommended for those vaccinated. I don't want to put our teachers in the place of having to be vaccine police and all that kind of stuff. I think it's just a loser. I mean, because, nobody wants to say they're not vaccinated if that's the kind of pressure they're feeling, right? So, and then I think that, K-8, just because, like I said, they're just not, right? So, and I don't know, what are the indices? We'd have to talk about that, but if we say, let's look at this again in, 30 days, we can ask the administration to give us some recommendations on what would be some reasonable indices to look at. So, I don't know.
Chris? Yeah, so that's what I thought you'd said earlier was your recommendation. And to me, from a risk mitigant standpoint, I'd always start kind of as you were talking about from the air controller standpoint. I look at it from the same lens. I'd rather start being more restrictive and then ease off. And again, just for the same reasons that John just articulated, cases are spiking now, right? And so we don't want to be in a position that we do something potentially to contribute to that spike even further. So I'd rather go a little bit more restrictive. And I'm also quite hopeful that, again, the younger children will be able to get vaccinated soon, right? So then that's one data point, is availability of vaccines for more of the population. And two, if these numbers, these 14-day trend numbers coming back down to where we were a month and a half ago, right? And if we see cases in the hospitals and stuff declining, and we'll just know more information. So I think as those things evolve, we'll adjust. But I personally, I'd rather start being more restrictive, and I think that's acceptable because again, the high schoolers are already at 71% vaccinated. I think they've already taken a pretty significant, put a barrier in place there that's should be rewarded, right? So having some strong is still, suggested that, encourage to wear masks, but if they don't, certain percentage, which will be a large percentage, won't wear them. So I guess that flexibility I think is okay, but I think for the younger students, unfortunately, I think it's better to start them in masks and then evolve.
I have a clarification question as well, maybe. So if we're requiring masks K through 8 in those schools, would we need to add an exemption for, or could we add an exemption for, because if they were both masking for close contact? Would we fall into that? So We had the conversation about,
Okay, I think I get your question. So, Annie, do you
That's what I was gonna ask.
Okay.
follow that, Ann?
Yes, I would fully support from a public health perspective, because that does follow the Minnesota Department of Health guidance, that if we have universal masking in K through 8, we would not need to quarantine close contacts. Again, we would do contact tracing and identify and notify those parents, and we would make the strong recommendation that we would still recommend that they be tested 3 to 5 days post-exposure, but that would be up to a parent's decision if they decided to test or not.
so for those middle schools, if we only went to 7th grade, as in the recommendation alternative 3, would we not be able to do that in the middle schools?
We would have to quarantine the students that didn't correct. Again, and we talked about some of the logistics, if you don't make it across the board, how difficult that would be in practical application. So then if at the high school level, it's just recommended if there is a student that was a close contact that did not fall into those exemption categories, then they would be subject to a quarantine period.
Okay, thank you.
You answered my question about the mandate,
Okay.
K-8.
Lisa?
All right, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the learning plan with the face covering alternative being that we require all students K-8 to mask at all times, and students in grades 8, 12, it's, strongly recommended for those who aren't vaccinated.
You covered 8th grade twice.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I was looking at the paper, thank you. So students 9 through 12 would be what I just said.
I'll second it, but can I add a point of discussion or maybe a friendly
Well, sure.
amendment?
Once we have a motion, then we can discuss, and then everyone can vote no, and it can
Okay.
only be.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay.
So with that modification, I would like to add some sort of clarification for parents and volunteers especially K-8 with the back-to-school events. I think parents are going to wonder themselves, and our administration, we're going to get questions on what that looks like for our parents and volunteers that come to school. So I think there should be something in our learning plan that outlines that. So I don't know if this is going to be considered a friendly amendment.
But what are you, how open are you wanting us to be?
Well,
If we're required
I
masks?
think if we're
are we-
requiring masks at K-8, we do the same thing. For K-8, I question that at the high school. So it could be strongly recommended at the high school. I don't know if you,
Are you asking?
I'm
Yeah.
thinking.
Thinking.
I'm thinking.
I mean, I guess for,
First of all, is this too far from a friendly amendment? Do we,
well, I didn't really actually say about adults,
I know.
so.
Well, I mean, you can always make an amendment, and then that gets voted on before the motion.
Oh, got it, okay.
It doesn't have to be friendly.
Okay. I actually think all of our visitors should be masked, is what I'm,
Are you asking for masking clarification or visitor? Because we weren't allowing visitors, right?
well, that was the other point, I don't know where we're at, so,
Yeah, I think that whole thing needs to be clarified from
Okay.
the board.
okay, let me think about that again.
Any other questions or comments?
We didn't actually, I guess I didn't say anything about staff. So I don't know what the vision was about staff or where we're at with that.
Well, the vision was to strongly recommend that staff wear masks. But if you're requiring all students to at the elementary and middle school, you may have a different attitude about that.
How does that look and feel to kids if their teacher's not wearing a mask and they have to?
Yeah.
Do we have a?
I think we can
Where in
all, I think we can all speculate on how they would feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're gonna require students wearing masks, you
Yeah.
have to require, it's everybody
I think
in the
so.
building.
Anybody in the building?
Regardless of vaccine status. I'm just asking.
Mhm.
I see the failure in my motion to.
Excuse me?
I see the failure in my motion to not include that part.
Well, I mean, you could have another motion on staff.
Yeah.
so.
Guys, question?
Yep.
Did staff have to wear masks, or were they allowed to use face shields this last year, this last spring?
They had to wear masks. They had to wear masks. I mean, they could wear a face shield as well, but a face shield was not a replacement for a mask.
Okay.
But some of them got those
Clear on this?
plastic types
Yeah.
over their mouth and all.
Could we say if the staff was vaccinated, they could wear a clear shield? I don't know. I mean, would that solve anything, or is that nothing?
I mean, if we require masks, we require masks.
Well, so for.
I mean, in my opinion.
For the
in opinion.
quarantining thing, if the staff isn't wearing a mask, does that matter?
She should just stand up there.
If we're gonna be following the guidelines as set forward, we would need to have everybody wearing a mask.
Okay, so,
And the other piece of that is, if we then start going down the road of staff and whether they're vaccinated and could wear something alternative, I think that gets into a different discussion, as Dr. Peterson brought up earlier, about that confidential information
yeah,
from
there's
staff.
hip and stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I'll just end that.
I saw John's hand
Yeah,
first.
So, Annie, not left eye. So to be clear, if it's mask for students, it's mask for staffs. That's MDH guidelines.
I think that's how they intended.
Okay. I just wanted to
Yeah.
yeah,
As far as MDH,
Right.
remember though, you're still in charge of how you do this.
Katie?
I saw Mike's hand over there.
Oh.
Yeah, so I guess I'm offering an amendment to suggest that the staff follows the policy of the school. Meaning that if for K-8, if we decide that the students are all wearing masks, and the staff would all wear masks, at the high school, we strongly recommended. As well as visitors.
You offering that as a friendly amendment?
It's friendly. It's a very friendly amendment.
Well, I get to decide if it's
You-
friendly.
she-
Well, that was my offer is friendly, she made it determine it wasn't friendly.
I would take that as a friendly amendment because I neglected to mention it, so.
Do you accept that in your second?
Yeah, then you.
I don't know. Did you say the high school was the same strongly recommended?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
staff follows students.
Yeah, if
I
it's a
think is what he said.
second motion to your friendly amendment, I don't know what I need to do.
Well, so since you seconded my motion, if I accept the friendly amendment, you have to too.
Oh.
So
yes,
can we
I'll-
clarify what that was?
Yeah, so I think it would be that students in K through 8 are required to wear a mask, as well as all staff and visitors. And there's a strong recommendation for staff members, visitors, and students, grades 9 through 12, to wear a mask.
Capture it, Carrie.
Said well.
And as part of this recommendation, when are we going to review it?
That was my question. Do we add that to,
I thought I said 30 days, did I not?
I would,
meant to.
I would meant to add that we will revisit this and,
Well, actually, you have a study session on the 23rd of
That's more than
September,
30
so
days.
That's a little more than 30 days.
once a month?
Did you want to make that, figure out how many days that is and make it that?
How
way?
about we revisit it at the
At the study session.
the September study session?
revisit at September, what is it, 23rd?
I mean, that'll be 3 meetings that pass.
And with that, should we have this district develop metrics to where we would release the restriction, or do we not want to tie us down?
Well, I think the district is recommending that we don't have masks mandatory at all. So I don't know,
So it would be ours?
I
Okay.
mean, I think we're owning this. I'm asking the district to come up with something that they're not recommending. I mean, we can.
Okay.
Mark, we actually toyed with that idea and decided collectively that'd be sending a mixed signal,
Okay.
put those thresholds in there. That it'd be cleaner to let the board decide at a later date what meets your expectations.
Okay.
I just had a question on timing. I know when I was aligning with Lisa, I was thinking 45 days from now, and you said 30 days, and so in my mind, I had thought, so we just have 4 weeks of actual school to actually understand, because if we said 4 weeks from now, you're actually, a week and a half of actual school.
Yeah,
So
you're
you're really
right,
not gonna know anything more than you're gonna know now.
Okay, so
the October meeting.
That's smart.
Yeah.
October study session then?
October 7th is the October date.
Yeah,
That's the regular meeting.
you'd have about 30 days then.
Right,
Let's do that, because if we wanted to vote on something, we could.
yep.
Okay.
I would be supportive if there was, a quick out for for families, for the board. So looking at that October 7th regular meeting makes sense? Yes,
I also, didn't mention early childhood because it's not covered in this document, and I'm assuming they're following their same
Yeah,
things that
they'll
they
do
had
what
before.
they're doing, yeah.
Right, okay. Just wanted to confirm.
so the motion on the table that's been seconded is to approve the back to school, what's it called? The Return to School Safe Learning Plan for 2021 with a modified alternative 3 is to require all students in K-8 to wear masks at all, students and staff to wear masks at all times, and to have strong recommendation for every staff member and students in grades 9 through 12 to wear a mask, and to be revisited at the October 7th regular meeting. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have a back-to-school plan.
Is Katie gonna do anything on the visitors?
Nope. I would say, I forgot to add the visitors portion that wasn't in here.
It was mimicking the
Visitors follow staff.
staff and visitors follow the recommendation of the school.
But no limit on how many visitors we get or
Oh,
what they have to do or?
I would say schools can decide.
yeah, no.
Yeah, I would defer to the district on that.
Chris?
Chris, so can I ask that, Jackie, as we communicate this out, that people know that there's different quarantine policies, right? So the benefits of a more restrictive policy, K through 8, which means you don't have quarantine.
Right.
And I think one of the things we're gonna have to watch is at the high school level, how many kids we have out in quarantine, right? I think that's gonna be has to be one of the metrics, is how many kids we lose in quarantine. What does that impact on their learning?
Yeah, well, we're gonna include most of the plan per se,
Right, but I think that whole quarantine distinction is a
Yeah.
big one.
yeah.
The quarantine exemption,
The exemption, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
and then the mask exemption for quarantine, the quarantine exemption with the masks
Correct.
at the younger levels.
As presented.
As presented.
Yes, Katie?
Before we move on from the back to school, it is I was really hopeful that we weren't gonna be in this position again. So it's a lot of work on our administrators, our staff, Dr. Peterson, all the work that you've done to put this together, and the options that we have, and, Annie, everything that you've done, you know, to outline for our staff and our students. Dr. Ledoux, everything that you've done for the instructional, I mean, absolutely, it just is, it goes endless to everybody that has worked so tirelessly again on a plan that where I think we don't wanna be again. So I just wanna say thank you to everybody who has worked hard on it, and to really recognize the community members who have reached out and shared their opinions and, their thoughtful emails and their messages and their community comments, because we're listening, and your message is heard, so I just want to say thank you to that also.
Thank you, Katie. Anybody else? Our next agenda item is the update on plan for filling board vacancy. Dr. Peterson, I assume that is mine. So I believe on Monday, we posted to the website our school board vacancy appointment process for 2021 to fill the vacancy created by board member Ritchie's resignation. You know, state law dictates that the vacancy on the school board must be filled by board appointment. Due to the timing of the resignation, the appointment shall begin 30 days after a resolution to make the appointment is passed by the board, and shall continue up until an election is held in November 2022. So as part of this process, the appointee will be on the board through 2022. We have some history of this. Board leadership has determined that we leverage the open application and interview process followed for every school board vacancy since 1971. This process was most recently used in 2012, when I believe board member Holcomb was added to the board. Qualifications, leverage required criteria established for 2012 appointment, an advocate and supporter of public education and the Minnetonka School District vision and mission, a consensus builder, strategic thinker, steward of resources, proven commitment to the district, and demonstrated school leadership in Minnetonka. Also consider experience in board work, experience in fiscal management, understanding of current board education issues in Minnesota, proven track record of getting the job done, does what they say they are going to do, and understand current brain research and differentiation. The timeline, we announced, it wasn't the 10th, it was the 16th, I believe. And so the open period started August 17th and goes through September 7th. Deadline is September 7th at 5 p.m. The board members will review applications the 8th through the 12th. At a September 9th special meeting, we will decide if the number of interviews and reference checks to conduct, I think my dates are off, I apologize. Board subcommittee assigned to develop interview and reference questions. So that is the 9th, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll set up interviews on the 13th as invitation for interviews. We'll conduct the interviews September 20th through 21st. Selection of finalists on the 23rd. Review of references the 24th through the 27th. And selection of a new board member at September 27th at a special board meeting. And then that appointment can't be until 30 days. And at the October 28th special meeting, study session will be the installment of the new board member. For those of you that want to apply, interested applicants need to submit a letter, resume, and 3 references. Materials can be submitted electronically to Board Vice Chair Mark Ambrosen at his email address, mark.ambrosen@minnetonkaschools.org, or in person at the DSC, the District Service Center. And the deadline again is September 7th at 5 p.m. At the September 9th special meeting, We will finalize the process for interviews, number of applicants to be interviewed, subcommittee appointed to determine questions for interviews and reference checks. The process for references, determine if reference check needed for only finalists or all applicants interviewed. And then at the September 17th, we'll have the invitation for interviews.
That should be the 13th.
13th, sorry. September 13th, I had that. Reading the wrong sheet, sorry. Great. Board Member Ambrosen, have you received any?
I have not.
Okay. As the DSC? So here is the formal call for the community who are interested to be considered for appointment to the board. Please come out. Great, we've already approved all this, so this is just an update. Any comments or questions from the board? Get those dates in your calendar.
Who wouldn't want to spend time with people up till 12:35 in the morning?
Everybody that's still streaming and watching this? Yeah, yeah.
I just want to thank Lisa Wagner for pulling together all the historical data and getting us along the path quickly.
Yes,
Thank you.
we thank our official, unofficial board historian, Lisa Wagner. Yeah. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Mike? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.